Hello, this is Hamlet from the Guild Elitist Jerks on the server Mal'Ganis, bringing you a challenge mode gold run of Mogu'shan Palace. This zone has one of the tightest timers of any challenge mode when you're trying to learn it alongside Stormstout Brewery. At the outset, you're going to pull either the first two or the first three trash packs heading into the first boss. We go with the first three here, which is slightly harder, but once you learn how to do it, gives you a little more time leeway for your route in the rest of the zone. It's two mobs at the entrance to this hallway. Make sure you don't get a patrol in the opening room or else you should reset. Four in the middle of the hallway, and then five when we get to the end here. Each of those sets has one Stormcaller in it, which we either have the DPS burst down on the way in or we CC them. The one in the third pack here, they interrupt and kill while we collect all the melee mobs and get our stun and kite setup ready. We used a shockwave and a ring of frost to help delay the middle mobs a bit so they weren't all arriving at the tank exactly at once. The Stormcaller got off a lightning storm on me there, so I just had to move. Stormcallers can also shock, which banishes someone for 6 seconds, and they have a long cast lightning bolt that does a lot of damage. Otherwise, once we used our shockwave and remorseless winter stun setup on the main pack of mobs, the DPS started AoEing and the tank kited them over this way while he triggered the boss fight. The Iron Maws can stun your tank, so you have to watch out for that while you're setting up the pack, and the Rib Crusher's whirlwind, so everybody has to be careful. Our DPS on this first pack was low because somebody forgot to cast Bloodlust. Ideally, they'd be dying sooner and someone would have come over here to trigger the boss fight even earlier. This first boss is so harmless that you may as well get the RP to start him going pretty much as soon as the trash pack is under control. The only meaningful ability is the Pet's Ravage, which does a lot of damage to one target over 10 seconds and is still easy to heal. The two Stormcallers we left Sheeped and Hexed are running back after us now. I don't know why people went all the way back over there to CC them. You can really just wait here, but make sure to CC them as soon as they get in range. You don't have to do it this way where you deal with the two casters during the boss fight. It probably wasn't even that much faster for us here because our timing wasn't totally tight, but it's actually easier to deal with them during this easy boss than it is to deal with them during the hard trash pack. I'm going to use my Heart of the Wild during one of the three bosses at my convenience, but I'm spending a lot of time DPSing on any of them because there isn't much to heal. Even if you don't use the strategy where you keep some mobs CC'd, you want to make sure someone runs in to trigger the boss fight quite early while you're fighting the trash. You have about 25 seconds from the moment someone runs into the center of the room until Kwai the Brute actually becomes active. As he gets to about 10%, someone's going to grip one of the sheeped mobs into the group, and we're going to kill it during the RP break. The timing here actually works out pretty well. It's going to die right around when we want to run up to Ming the Cunning and start attacking him. Ming the Cunning himself has a lightning bolt that hits the tank pretty hard, so don't let him sit at low HP. He summons some whirling dervishes that players at range have to dodge, and at low HP he'll pull anyone nearby into a magnetic vortex that does some damage, but it won't affect you if you're at max range. I mentioned at the beginning of the run that this zone has a very tight timer. Like my other videos though, in this run I still try to show a route that gives a little bit of time to spare for things that go wrong, since something you'll get used to as you try challenge modes is that unexpected things always happen during a run. Here we already lost some time to the Bloodlust error. There's going to be some time wasted at the end of this mini-boss, and then near the end of the zone there are going to be some very unfortunate patrol timings. In the end, it's not quite as tightly timed a zone as Stormstout Brewery, the other zone that only gives you 12 minutes. Especially if you learn the triple trash pull at the beginning of the zone, as well as a slightly aggressive trash pull at the end after the elevator, you have enough leeway to get gold on any smooth run. This is where I said we lost some time earlier. This Stormcaller somehow got pulled into a very awkward position. What you really want to do is kill him in the room as we're finishing off Ming the Cunning and then run past the pillar so we can start fighting Haiyan here as soon as he becomes active. Our slow start on this mini-boss also means that he's going to get a second conflagrate off, which wastes a few seconds as people have to move around more than they would have. When you start fighting him, you stay spread out for the first conflagrate. Obviously, no one should spread it to anyone else. It's pretty easy to handle. And then you clump up for the meteor. The meteor doesn't hit very hard. It also looks like it leaves a big pattern of fire on the ground, but it actually doesn't. You're totally fine to just keep standing there and continue DPSing him after it lands. And in fact, if you have him a bit lower than this, so that he's not going to get a second conflagrate off, you can just stand there and finish him off. We spread back out because he is going to cast a second one. All told, we're about 20 seconds behind where we should be right now. If you do get this conflagrate, just make sure that nobody runs onto the person until it's expired while you're clumping at the end of the stairs. In any event, wait right here to fall through into the basement. I'm going to dash down the hallway and drink while our mage sets up for the the invis run. Somebody has to aggro the Glintrock Scout, but that leaves you in combat for a very long time. So ideally you can use a mage, rogue, hunter, or I think night elf in order to do that while the rest of the group waits back here and doesn't get into combat with it. If you have no one who can do those things, you'd probably have someone run up, aggro the scout, then die to that pack at the bottom of the stairs and get rezzed. Once the scout has moved on and we're all out of combat, we're going to move up here to start our invis run. We had yet another delay here because someone was out of potions and had to trade. Normally, as soon as we were all out of combat, we'd move up to just before the aggro point of this pack. Marking it on a practice run is a good idea, by the way. And then I stampede and start the invis run. With a regular 18-second invis pot, you can just barely make it to the end of the hallway. You also want to make sure before doing real runs that everyone can clear the railing on the first try. Those of us who are faster wait for the tank to go over the wall first and then immediately follow him. The moment you land in Gekken's room can be harrowing because you don't have hots on anyone, you've all just taken fall damage and the tank is landing right on a pack of mobs and a boss. I told him to use shield wall as he hits the ground, and then while we're getting into position, I also shift to tree and start stabilizing everyone. There's one person who forgot to tuck in behind the pillar, so there's a mob that doesn't get LOS'd over right away. Pretty soon they're all over here though, and we can start interrupting. There are 3 mobs that you want to interrupt quite regularly. The Oracle heals the group, the Hexer puts a slow debuff on people, and the Ironhide puts a damage protection buff on the entire group. It can be hard to consistently interrupt everything while there are still 3 casting mobs up. We use our stun rotation here, we keep a grounding totem down. Basically remember any abilities you have that can help out. Whenever I have a free moment, I just mash Demoralizing Roar in the hopes that it'll help with something. As soon as the Ironhide is down, then we have 2 interrupters on each of the Oracle and the Hexer, so then it's straightforward from here on out. The Hexer is probably the least important to interrupt because if his Hex of Lethargy gets off, the healer can just dispel it as long as it doesn't happen very often. Gekken occasionally casts a buff on one of the mobs that increases haste, increases damage taken, and makes it immune to CC. That doesn't wind up mattering too much while we're clumping them all up and AoEing them though. Gekken will give himself that same buff stacking every time a mob dies, so once you have 3 or 4 of them down, he's taking a lot more damage and attacking a lot more quickly. It generally means that you don't want to spend too much time putting damage into him until they're all dead. Once he's by himself, we move him out into the middle of the room a bit closer to the elevator while everyone finishes him off. Make sure you keep the tank safe. Here I am looking around on the balcony for a patrol. It walks all the way around the circle of the balcony, and occasionally you can be extremely unlucky and have it directly between you and the elevator when Gekken dies. If that happens, you still just have to run past it, CC it in any way you can, root it, and then get yourself onto the elevator. In this case, it's not there, so we use 2 hard CCs on the 2 static mobs while we run to the elevator. That gives the added benefit of staying out of combat so I can drink on the way up. It's not completely essential though. The elevator comes a fixed time after Gekken dies, so as long as nobody tarries, you can make it there just fine. If you are in combat with these 2 oracles at the top or with any other mobs, remember that they'll be shooting you this whole time while they run at you, and the healer's going to have to be healing that while you stand here. In that case, you'll want to move off the elevator at the top and probably take a short break while he drinks before moving on to the final trash sequence. Coming up right after the elevator is one of the most significant bits of patrol luck in any challenge mode. There's a group of 4 mobs that patrols from right around where we're entering the square hallway now into this corner where you can see it right here. In this run, we are within about 2 or 3 seconds of just being able to skip it entirely. It has a small chance of happening, but if it does, you can save about a minute that you would otherwise spend killing them because you don't need them for the mob count. There's just no other convenient way to skip them. If you have a rogue with Shroud of Concealment, I suppose you could skip them every time, which would help a lot. The pack has 2 Swift Blades and 2 Flame Seekers. The Flame Seekers have a channel called Molten Barrage that must be interrupted. If you have excess interrupts, you can interrupt more nukes just to reduce damage on the group if you want. While they're fighting those, I'm checking where this other patrol that runs across the hallway is. It's quite hard to fight this entire pack of 4 along with the next 2 packs going into the final boss room, so our compromise is that we kill the 2 Flame Seekers and then move on dragging the Swift Blades while we pull the next 2 packs. Unfortunately, yet again, this patrol that walks across the hallways in exactly the wrong position as we prepare to move on, so we have nothing better to do but to finish off the Swift Blades and then wait here out of combat while we get ready to move past them. That's about another extra 20 seconds of waiting we didn't need, added to the few mistakes we made earlier in the zone. I only point that out to say that if this strategy had gone cleanly, it would have had quite a lot of leeway in it, and just the reason we use a strategy like this is that this way we can still finish the zone even if a few things go wrong. Once we can safely move past the patrol, we picked up the 2 static high guards in the hallway. Ideally, we'd have been dragging 2 Swift Blades behind us too. We Ring of Frost them just to slow them a bit while our tank gets ready to pick up the 4-pull that's in the room. It does have 1 Flame Seeker in it, so our DPS focuses that and interrupts it first while we're getting all the other 5 to 7 mobs gathered safely. As soon as that happens, we use our usual AoE stun rotation. In this case, it's Shockwave and then Remorseless Winter. It helps if your tank is one of the players who has a stun, since then he can do it at exactly the right time when he needs to be safe, and the DPS can key their stun timings off of him. The 3 high guards you're going to be fighting do put a stacking armor debuff on the tanks, and generally is going to be kiting more than he is tanking until the mobs start dying. When these mobs are dead or almost dead, you can move on and pull the 4 Guardians. They have a long-range pounce ability that they cast on a random player, so unless everyone is stacked up completely, you can't DPS them efficiently because they'll jump around all over the place. So there isn't much point pulling them until their previous mobs are low enough that you can safely continue fighting them while everyone is standing still. Once you're down to just the 4 Guardians with everyone standing on them, they're pretty easy to DPS down. The bleed they leave on the tank will soak a little bit of healing, but it shouldn't be anything too threatening compared to the trash we've just fought. You'd really like to finish this pack and start Shin the Weapon Master with about a minute 30 left. With less time like we have here, you have to count on a really clean Shin in order to make it in time, and it's a hectic enough fight that you don't really want to rely on that. It's also quite possible that your healer is going to really need mana if you've chain pulled all the trash since the elevator like we did. Here someone moved away too early, so we gotta jump off. If your healer needs mana, then the instant you drop combat, he should start an amber, and if you're desperate for time, you just pull. Obviously, you'd rather not pull a boss with the tank at 1/3 HP and the healer an amber, but sometimes it's your only choice. With only a minute 10 to fight him, I'm also going to be using Heart of the Wild to DPS quite a bit during an already chaotic fight. We Bloodlust at the beginning of the fight when there's the least going on. In challenge mode, he has the same mechanics as heroic mode, except they're obviously somewhat more deadly. He always activates Whirlwind Axes first, and then the lines of blade traps across the room, and then the crossbows that continuously shoot people. The blade traps that start at 66% are always in the same place, so you shouldn't be surprised by them when they appear. You should have a spot where you expect to stand from your practice attempts that you know you're comfortable in. Healing this fight can be tricky because it's all avoidable damage, so you have no real way of knowing when people are going to take a hit. Remember that everyone's going to start taking damage from the crossbows at 33%, so you don't want to be behind on healing when you get to that point. We are going to make use of the secret weapon from the heroic achievement. Once he's below 33%, there will be a gem active in both the northwest and southeast corners of the room. If 2 players go and hit them within 3 seconds of each other, then this laser light show will activate that does 10% damage to the boss and does a little damage to everyone in the room. It's a small gain, but worth it if you can do it safely. So with that very clean final boss fight, we do make it with a few seconds to spare, even after various problems.